Raul Castro, the man who ruled over Cuba with an iron fist, followed in the footsteps of his infamous brother, Fidel Castro. Together, they transformed a once prosperous nation into a land of economic devastation, political repression, and despair. Before the Castro brothers took control, Cuba was known as the Pearl of the Caribbean, boasting one of the strongest economies in Latin America. But everything changed after 1959, when Fidel and Raúl, along with their revolutionary forces, overthrew the Batista government and established a communist dictatorship that would forever alter Cuba's trajectory. While Fidel may have been the face of the revolution, Raúl Castro was its enforcer. As a committed Marxist-Leninist, Raúl played a crucial role in shaping the repressive regime that followed. Raúl Castro Ruz, the 27-year-old brother of Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, became the commander-in-chief of the Cuban Armed Forces in February 1959. Fidel had previously named Raúl as the second most important leader and his successor in the event of his death. Raúl has often been accused of being communist or pro-communist, and while his actual political affiliation remains uncertain, his actions have supported communist activities in Cuba. He is staunchly anti-American and frequently blames the United States for Cuba's economic, political, and social issues, accusing the U.S. of controlling a significant portion of Cuba's wealth and backing dictatorial regimes. He also criticized the U.S. for continuing to supply arms to Batista, despite the embargo enacted in March 1958. Born on June 3, 1931, on his father's plantation in Oriente Province, Raúl attended secondary school in Santiago de Cuba and briefly attended the University of Havana. In early 1959, after Batista's overthrow, he married Vilma Espin, a fellow rebel reported to have communist ties. In 1953, Raúl participated in a youth conference in Vienna, where he was a speaker. Afterward, he traveled through Europe and potentially visited communist countries before returning to Cuba in June. He was briefly detained at customs for carrying communist propaganda. Raúl also took part in Fidel's failed 1953 assault on the Moncada barracks, was captured, and later freed under an amnesty in May 1955. He followed Fidel into exile and was part of the invasion force that landed in Cuba in December 1956. In March 1958, Raúl led a small group to establish the Second Front in northern Oriente Province. He gained international attention later that year by kidnapping over 50 U.S. and Canadian citizens, including personnel from the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay. Despite Fidel's disapproval, Raúl held the captives for 3 weeks, gaining publicity and halting Cuban Air Force bombings temporarily. This act led to speculation that Raúl was attempting to establish himself independently as a revolutionary leader. Despite occasional differences, both Fidel and Raúl have consistently portrayed their relationship as harmonious. However, Raúl's speech at the University of Havana in April 1959 attacked the U.S. as an enemy of the Cuban Revolution, contrasting with Fidel's more conciliatory speeches during his visit to the United States at the same time. From early on, Raúl took charge of the military. He was instrumental in consolidating the regime's power through violent purges of dissenters, mass executions, and forced labor camps. Under his leadership, the Cuban military became the most formidable in the region, both feared and loathed. But Raúl Castro's dark legacy didn't end with military power. The Castro regime has long been linked to drug trafficking. Throughout the 1980s, there were credible reports that Cuba had ties to drug cartels in Latin America, acting as a middleman in the cocaine trade, shipping drugs from Colombia to the United States. Raúl Castro's military and intelligence apparatus reportedly helped facilitate the movement of narcotics, bringing in millions of dollars to the regime, even as ordinary Cubans were left to starve in a crippled economy. These ties further stained Raúl's already tarnished legacy, showing the true extent of his regime's criminality, repression, censorship, and economic collapse. Under Raúl Castro's leadership, Cuban citizens have lived in poverty and isolation for decades. After officially taking over from Fidel in 2008, Raúl oversaw one of the worst economic collapses in Cuban history. The promises of equality and prosperity made by the revolution were never fulfilled. Instead, most Cubans live in a country where dissent is crushed, food shortages are widespread, and basic freedoms are a distant memory. Under Raul Castro, Cuba's communist regime reached its weakest point in decades. The island struggled with severe economic issues, a significant brain drain, harsh repression of dissidents, and crumbling state institutions, all of which took a heavy toll on the country. However, due to the regime's tight grip on society, meaningful change remains unlikely in the near future. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and political freedoms do not exist in Cuba. Independent journalists, dissidents, and human rights activists are routinely harassed, imprisoned, or exiled. Raúl, like his brother, maintains a stranglehold on the media, allowing only the state's voice to be heard. Foreign alliances and anti-American sentiment. Raúl Castro's regime has always supported countries that oppose the United States. Cuba has historically aligned itself with governments that hold deeply anti-American sentiments, including Venezuela, North Korea, and Iran. These alliances have only served to isolate Cuba further on the world stage. Cuba's regime has exported its revolutionary ideals to other countries, offering military and logistical support to anti-US insurgencies across Latin America, further destabilizing the region. Raúl has been complicit in spreading not just political repression at home, but instability abroad. The legacy of the Castro regime. Today, Raúl Castro has stepped down as Cuba's formal leader, but his legacy of repression remains deeply ingrained in the country. The new generation of Cuban leadership continues the Castro policies of censorship, control, and economic suffering. Raúl may have left office, but the damage he and his brother inflicted on Cuba will last for generations. The Cuban people have lost their freedom, their prosperity, and their place in the world because of the Castro brothers. While Raúl may not receive as much attention as his older brother Fidel, his role in dismantling the fabric of Cuban society cannot be overlooked. The road to recovery will be long and hard for Cuba, but Raúl Castro's place in history is already set, one of destruction, repression, and corruption. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay updated on future content. Let's keep learning and uncovering the stories that shape our world.